Quick reminder that the description has a link to a resource website that you can use to help contribute to ongoing Black Lives Matter organizations. You can do a myriad of things like donate to bail funds or sign petitions, all of which go a long way to fighting systemic racism. Thank you very much for your time. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. So I may have gone on a long emotional rant about this before, but to keep it brief, Madolche is one of my favorite decks. On top of my own personal connections to it, the deck is just really well designed with an interesting gimmick. The cards are all very cute, and the colors and compositions are all very well designed. And the fact that they avoid the graveyard by default is pretty antithetical to the game at large, especially in today's graveyard-driven meta. But it does reward investment. As you dig into the mechanics, you start to see how they all fit together. Like how Chateau turns return to the deck to add to the hand, so your opponent destroying your monsters only puts them back in your hand to use them for later turns. Oh, or how Angeli seems like it's a contradiction to the theme, like cause tributing them would keep them in the grave, but if you use it to summon Hootcake, it enables the bird... beast? It enables the bird beast better than any other effect in the deck. It's almost like every card in the deck is a piece of a bigger puzzle. Oh my god. So it's been a pleasant surprise to see the deck actually get a steady stream of support over the years, and in stark contrast to the legacy of, well, legacy support, it's actually all pretty good, especially in the game's latest core set, Eternity Code. So that's going to be the focus of today's video. We'll be looking through the pantry to see what we've got on hand, get to baking some sweets with the new ingredients, and topping it all off with some complimentary cake decorations. It's time to make a melange with Madolche. But before we continue, I wanted to ask really quick if you could please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my content so far. That way you can stay up to date on new releases, and my brain makes the happy juice when good numbers go up. Oh, and ringing the bell is a pretty good way to stay on top of things as well. Analysis videos like these tend to do pretty well, but if you like any of my other series like Top 10s and Dream Theme, that's a pretty good way to make sure you catch them, as well as my Friday live streams. Thank you for your patience. Now back to the video. So wind the clock back to 2012. It's August, and Return of the Duelist has been unleashed on local game stores everywhere. It's the beginning of the second year that Xyz Summoning's been around, and both Girja and Spellbooks are getting cards that would define them for years to come. And releasing alongside them was an unassuming entourage of socialites based on a variety of sweets and other confections. The Madolche, who, oddly enough, didn't at all care about Xyz Summoning at the time. It was essentially Puddingcess.deck, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with the monsters. All of them are Earth attribute and share one effect. When this card is destroyed by an opponent's card and sent to the graveyard, it's shuffled back into the deck. It is mandatory, so even though it says when, it'll just activate on a new chain. Mufui is a level 3 beast with 500 attack and 300 defense. When normal summoned, you can special summon any Madolche from your hand. Mufui has usually been a controversial pick, but undeniably useful when it resolves, as the deck has always looked for new ways to field as many Madolche as possible to execute their combos. The problem is if you don't have any other Madolches in hand to pair with it, your only game plan is to convince your opponent to spend the entire turn musing over how cute it is, and so far I haven't gotten that to work. But it hasn't stopped me from running at least one, look at their sleepy little face. Baepal is a level 3 beast with 0 attack and 1800 defense. Once per turn, on activation, you can target 2 attack position monsters, one being a Madolche you control and the other being any of your opponents, and if both of them are on the field at resolution, you change both to defense position, and their positions can't change until the end of your opponent's next turn. Yeah, this belongs in an odd subset of Madolches that care about battle position, which doesn't do much to synergize with the rest of the theme. Which is a real shame because I was hoping the Pancake Madolche would be much more competitively relevant. Chevalier is a level 4 warrior with 1700 attack and 1300 defense, and keeps your opponent from attacking any other Madolche monster you control, except copies of itself. Not really much to say here, none of the smaller Madolches really generate advantage for you over time, so keeping them safe from battle wasn't going to keep your opponent off your game plan effectively. It's all puff and no tough. See, it's funny, because Chaud à la Creme is what Americans call a cream puff, so Chevalier is Magellan is a level 4 spellcaster with 1400 attack and 1200 defense. When normal or flip summoned, you can add one Madolche monster from your deck to your hand. Still seeing play today, this Sorceress Stratos has gotten better and better with each new release, getting more and more targets for you to grab. And while this is skipping ahead a bit, now that the deck has access to a double summon, it's a good time to point out that Magellan isn't once per turn. and it can search other copies of itself. Talk about asking for seconds! Butlerusk is a level 4 spellcaster with 1500 attack and 800 defense, and when they're normal summoned, you can add any field spell from your deck to your hand, but you must control another Madolche monster to activate and resolve the effect. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, we clearly have better searchers for the deck's signature field spell, which we'll get into in a moment, but they search any field spell. Mystic Mine, anyone? How about Necro Valley to stop those pesky graveyard decks? Magellan would be pleased as punch to have some real estate in the secret village of the spellcasters. Heck, I'm even seeing Guru Madolche lists floating around right now. Why not just grab the hidden city? In all seriousness, it's probably not that good right now, but just wait for the right splashable field spell to come out and mark my words, Butlerusk is going to show up as a super rare in the next OTS pack. Our last monster for the set is Madolche Puddingcess, a level 5 fairy with 1000 attack and defense. While you have no monsters in your grave, she gains an extra 800 attack and defense. I know, an 1800 level 5 is pretty underwhelming, even for 2012 standards. But trust me, it gets slightly better. See, regardless if your graveyard has monsters or not, if Puddingcess battles a monster, you can target and destroy any card your opponent controls. So ideally, you'd normal summon Mufui, special summon the Puddingcess out of your hand, then start wrecking shop. Personally, I like to believe that whenever Puddingcess activates that effect, they're Mario tossing the monster they're battling into whatever they want to destroy. At this point in history, it's not really strong enough to build a deck around, and even nowadays I'd hesitate to keep it on the front line, but for better or worse, this Princess of the Palette will continue to be a staple of the deck. Next we have the Candy Kingdom itself, Madolche Chateau. When this field spell is activated, all Madolche monsters in your grave get shuffled back into the deck. Very helpful for making sure Puddingcess is in peak condition. And with it granting all Madolches a 500 attack and defense boost, this cranks up Puddingcess to 2300 attack. Not a mean feat for someone that can be deployed by a cat. But perhaps best of all is that, if a monster or monsters in your grave would be returned to your deck by the effect of a Madolche monster, you can add those cards to your hand instead. So even if they do destroy your Puddingcess, it's only a matter of time before they hit the field again. And since this would also allow you to normal summon Magellan again, you're never far from concocting your next entry in culinary combat. Okay, so the next 3 supporting traps are pretty weird. Lesson targets and shuffles one Madolche monster in your grave into your deck, then all Madolches you currently control gain 800 attack and defense permanently, then gives you the option to shuffle another monster in your grave into your deck. This is clearly meant to help get Puddingcess online if you have to tribute summon her, and to be fair, combined with Chateau she'd be at a staggering 3100 attack. But that setup is so slow and specific, whereas if you're playing a pure Madolche build, Chateau could do all that by itself, and a lot quicker. So I guess the lesson here is, don't play it? Waltz is a continuous trap that burns your opponent for 300 every time one of your Madolche monsters battles, whether by attacking or being attacked. I assume the idea here was, with Chateau making your board particularly sticky, you could incidentally burn your opponent for about 600 a turn, letting you shore up your resources while still ticking down your opponent's life points. But Waltz is no Trickstar Lycoris, and I doubt any proficient deck was scared to lose such small amounts of life points to pirouette over your opponent's battle lines. The last return of the Duelist Madolche card is T-Break. This, I could actually imagine seeing play. Negating the activation of a spell or trap because your grave has no monsters, you know, the thing Puddingcess would want you to do anyway, was a good way to keep you safe. And it even has a bonus effect if you control Puddingcess, which is basically her battle effect of destroying a card your opponent controls. So the Madolche T lets Puddingcess deflect esoteric power. Okay, got it. The lore is getting clearer and clearer with each card. So on initial release, the game plan mainly seems to revolve around setting up Princess and attacking turn after turn, amping their attack with Chateau and Lesson, until you've stripped your opponent's field of cards while you maintain all your resources. Slow, and not very successful at the time, but things were brewing just beneath the surface. Abyss Rising would release 3 months later, and we'd see an update to the Madolche lineup that would give the deck arguably the best removal in the entire game. First we have Madolche Corrupsant, a level 3 beast with 1500 attack and defense. Once per turn, you can target a Madolche card you control, except itself, return it to the hand, then Corrupsant increases their level by 1 and attack by 300. This can be useful for getting another grave reset out of Chateau, and for putting Magellan back in your hand if you need the search, but otherwise isn't very helpful, which is pretty rough. Marmalmaid is a level 4 spellcaster with 800 attack and defense. When they're flipped face up, you can target then add one Madolche spell or trap from your grave to your hand. So it's a flip monster without being a flip monster. And even the battle position matters Madolches can't really help trigger this card in a timely manner. Yeah, I think they need to go do some cross-training with the Dragon Maids, cause this ain't up to snuff. Messengelado is a level 4 warrior with 1600 attack and defense. If they're special summoned, you can add any Madolche spell or trap from your deck to your hand, but you have to have a Beast-type Madolche on board to activate and resolve the search. This was an excellent reason to play Mufui at the time, because it was the best way to ensure you got to your support as soon as possible, and with a decent 2100 attack under Chateau, it's a strong addition to your offensive lineup. Now if only our own post office was as well funded. That's all for the main deck monsters. Now we have our first extra deck boss monster, Madolche Queen Tiramisu, a rank 4 fairy with 2200 attack and 2100 defense, requiring 2 level 4 Madolche monsters as material. Of note, the extra deck Madolches do not have the effect where they're forced to shuffle back into the deck if they're destroyed. Once per turn, you can detach one material, then target up to 2 Madolche cards in your graveyard, then at resolution, you shuffle those cards into your deck, then do the same thing to as many cards your opponent controls, up to the number of cards returned. And this is very powerful, mostly because the way it's worded allows for a number of powerful exploits. See, it doesn't target, so it'll get past any protection short of just being unaffected by card effects. And there isn't a card in the game, save for Serpentine Princess, that floats when shuffled into the deck. It's a clean answer to almost any board, and if your opponent doesn't respond to the summon or negate it outright, they're in for a world of hurt. Also, it doesn't specify that the targeted cards have to return to the deck, just that they are returned. So, for instance, if you targeted 2 Madolches in your grave and had Chateau on the field, you could add those 2 cards back to your hand instead and still shuffle away 2 cards. It's so obscenely powerful that you could add those 2 cards back to your hand and still shuffle away 2 cards. It's so obscenely powerful that despite years of power creep, it's still the haymaker effect of the deck to this day. And all future support is arguably an attempt to get this online as quickly and as safely as possible. Resolving this really does feel like getting the royal treatment. And if that wasn't enough, they released her with one of the best support cards of the deck, Madolche Ticket. Whenever a Madolche monster is added to your hand or deck from your field or grave, you can add any Madolche monster from your deck to your hand. Unless of course you control a fairy type Madolche, then you can special summon that monster instead, which is rather convenient because activating Tiramisu just so happens to fulfill all the requirements for the special summon trigger. So you get to wipe away 2 of your opponent's cards, perhaps grab back 2 of your own if you have Chateau, and then summon a new monster to add to your damage. You could get Pudding Cess for the raw power, or perhaps Messengelado if you already have another beast on board and want to keep accruing card advantage, or to just make another Tiramisu. Remember, this is from the age where they didn't print hard once per turns quite as much as they should have. So you could very well just make another Tiramisu to clear out even more cards, and that's more than worth the price of admission. The last Abyss Rising card for the set is Madolche Palooza, a normal trap that lets you special summon as many Madolche monsters from your hand as you want, but they get shuffled into the deck when the party's over, or in the modern parlance, the end phase. An interesting one of, to say the least, this card could throw out blockers in a pinch, or unjam a monster logged hand so you can use them as material to jumpstart your endgame. It's even a fun way to trigger Messengelado at odd times, and it can even be searched by the messenger if you're stocked up on your other support cards. However, its novelty is the only real thing going for it, and more focused decks will usually leave this behind. But in the age of the Link summon, it could always make a resurgence if the right monster comes along to become the life of the party, or in this case, the Palooza. We then skip a set and move into 2013, where Madolche get a couple new updates in Lords of the Tachyon Galaxy. The most important is Hootcake, a level 3 beast with 1500 attack and 1100 defense. Once per turn, you can banish 1 monster in your grave to summon any Madolche from your deck. So not only does this help keep your grave empty and allow you to splash some non-Madolche monsters in your deck, it also helps enable some of the deck's best cards. Pudding Cess can now be easily summoned from the deck while also setting up the empty grave effect, or you could grab Messengelado to grab any of your support cards. This also meant that you could run cards like Effect Veiler to interrupt your opponent, something the deck had been struggling to use effectively until now. It was a real hoot. And then there's the counter trap, Madolche Knights, which implies, if not outright confirms, that the Madolches are all just dolls and not actual fictional candy people. This lore is great, very clear and concise, classic example of the good old Yu-Gi-Oh storytelling through card art. Anyway, it works much like T-Break, where you have to have no monsters engraved to activate, but this time it negates a monster effect. It doesn't destroy them, but it does negate the activation. And if you control Pudding Cess, a random card in your opponent's hand gets shuffled into the deck. This has been a very contentious pick for me. I could ignore the fact that T-Break doesn't destroy because spells and traps rarely needed it, but monsters usually need to be destroyed so they aren't used as material as well. But with the advent of the hand trap, well, I'm still hesitant to recommend it, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try it. The next set, Judgment of the Light, had only a single Madolche, Chicolots. It's a level 3 beast with 800 attack and 1500 defense, and hoo boy does this effect have a lot of text. So, if the battle position of a Madolche monster is changed, and is now face up, while you control Chicolots, you can target any monster on the field, change it to face up defense position, and it can no longer attack, and has its effects negated. Unless that monster is a Madolche, in which case, you don't do anything bad to it, and you've just managed to put it in defense position. What gets me about it is that this effect is actually ridiculously strong. Like blanking out a monster until it leaves play? A lot of decks would kill for that kind of effect. But even now, the awkward activation requirement is so unwieldy that not even modern versions of the deck can make it work. Not to mention it's wholly useless against Link monsters. And that's probably why we haven't heard a peep from them since their release. Madolche would be silent for 2 more sets before surfacing again in Primal Origin, the last set of the Xyz era. Angeli is a level 4 fairy with 1000 attack and defense. You contribute them to special summon any Madolche from your deck. The summoned monster can't be destroyed by battle, but you have to shuffle the monster into your deck during the end phase of your next turn. Angeli is a great wild card for any monster in your deck, but was especially good at enabling Hootcake. By itself, you could summon the owl, banish the Angeli for activation, and summon Messengelato to grab either Ticket or Chateau. It was also a fairy you could reasonably normal summon that could trigger Ticket's summon effect. This delightful divinity does so much for the deck, it really helps to jelly it all together. Skip ahead another year to the release of Crossed Souls, and a new extra deck matron will be added to the court. An upgraded Pudding Cess ready to fill their mother's shoes, Chocolat a la mode. They're a rank 5 fairy with 2500 attack and 2200 defense, and requires 2 level 5 earth monsters, but can be made by stacking her on top of any rank 4 or lower Madolche Xyz monster. Once per turn, you can target and shuffle a Madolche card in your grave back into your deck. This effect combos with another effect they have, where you can detach a material to summon any Madolche from your deck in face-up attack or face-down defense position, if a Madolche card or cards are shuffled into your deck. But the catch is that the original Pudding Cess has to be attached as material to even activate the effect, and that was tricky to say the least. Pudding Cess was and is the only level 5 Madolche, so you'd have to resort to some weird workarounds if you wanted to summon it for optimal effects. However, once Brilliant Fusion was released, it was almost like a pseudo Madolche card by itself. Like, you could get a level 5 Earth attribute Seraphonite, the extra normal summon the deck craved, and you get a free material because of the Performage engine. It was a match made in dessert heaven. And then Thunder Dragons had to come along and ruin it for everyone. They got off easy with only losing Colossus, is all I'm saying. Alright, now we're getting into some more recent history. 2018 rolled around, and we got access to Madolche Fresh Sistart, which, judging from the stained glass imagery and habit, probably means she's not actually anyone's sister, but a clergy member of the Orthodox faith of the Madolche monarchy, that venerates Our Lady of Perpetual Chocolate Fountains. They're a Link 2 fairy with 1500 attack that needs 2 Madolche monsters as material. While any of their arrows point to a Madolche monster, your Madolche spells and traps can't be targeted or destroyed by card effects. Also, if Sistart would be destroyed, you can shuffle a Madolche monster in your grave into your deck instead. This is super important, because keeping things like Chateau and Ticket online for as long as possible is very important to your continued success. And since they too are a fairy, they pair particularly well with the latter. In fact, they work so well together that at this point, I put them together religiously. But while the Link monster isn't anyone's sister, Petting Cessure certainly is. Pudding Cess's younger sister is a level 4 fairy with 1400 attack and defense. If you have no monsters in your graveyard, you can special summon Petting Cessure from your hand. And if they're special summoned in any way, you can special summon any Madolche monster from your hand or deck and reduce its level by 1. The catch being that, if you do this, you're locked into Madolche special summons for the rest of the turn. This does limit some of the deck's most useful plays that rely on outside support, but this petite powerhouse is so good you may hardly even notice. Without even using your normal summon, you could get them and Puddingcess on the board, Xyz summon for Tiramisu, then rank up into Choco a la mode, all while keeping Puddingcess as material. And much like Angeli, while Puddingcess here has an optimal play, it can be adapted for a number of scenarios, including summoning a Gelato if you already have a Beast Madolche, a Hootcake if you have the material in grave and want to summon Gelato that way, or even get Angeli to set up the grave for that play. Puddingcess here is another great card that adds consistency to the deck and gives you more normal summons by way of bypassing them entirely. It's a great addition to the deck, and I've gotta say, even though there's a bit of a drawback, the idea that you can't do anything but summon Madolches, and that their best target for the effect is Puddingcess, really sells the narrative that Puddingcess here is a little sibling that just really wants to spend time with their cooler older sibling, and I just think that's adorable. The set afterwards, Dark Neostorm, would introduce a new monster that solves one of Madolche's biggest issues. Going first! Presenting Madolche Teacher Glass Souffle, a rank 4 fairy with 1800 attack and 2500 defense. As a quick effect, you can detach a material, then target one Madolche monster you control, and for the rest of the turn, that face-up monster is unaffected by any monster effect, except their own. Also, as a separate effect, if a Madolche card is sent to the grave, you can shuffle up to 2 cards from any grave into the deck. So not only does this work to keep your key monsters safe from stuff like Nibiru, you can also shuffle away cards that thrive in your opponent's grave, i.e. any Eldritch card. Also, I may be a bit late to the party on this revelation, but combined with Chateau, you can add any monster from your grave to your hand. Yeah, Chateau only cares that the monsters are returned to the deck by a Madolche monster effect, but past that point, any monster is fair game. You can grab back key play starters, or even hand traps if you want to keep your opponent on their toes. It's a really good way to get their attention, because when Glass Souffle hits the board, class is in session. So that's all the cards the deck has access to pre-Eternity Code, and it was pretty solid. With a fully deployed board, you get OTK with only a few monsters, and cards like Tiramisu could make trivial work of your opponent's obstacles. However, we can push the deck even further, and that's where the new additions come in. First is Madolche Salon, a continuous spell that grants you an extra normal summon of a Madolche monster. Also, if a Madolche is sent from your field or grave to your hand or deck, much like Ticket's trigger, you get to set any Madolche spell or trap from your deck to the field. This is incredible, because it feels like a designer went, hey, now that Madolche can't use Brilliant Fusion anymore, how about we just give them a searchable double summon that will also search them their best cards? It's really hard to articulate just how important this is for Madolches. Most of the deck's best plays revolve around powerful normal summons, but if they get negated, your turn's basically over. But Salon helps you play through those pesky interactions, and takes some of the pressure off of Gelato to get you your other combo pieces, especially since you tend to run very few of them. It does so much for the deck, I've gotta wonder if Salon is taking hair appointments right now. But on top of being able to gather combo pieces to advance your game plan, Salon can also grab a really strong piece of interaction. Madolche Promenade. When activated, you target one face-up card your opponent controls, and one Madolche on your field or in your graveyard. And on resolution, you negate the effects of the opponent's card until the end of the turn, and if you do, add the targeted Madolche back to your hand. Hey, wait a sec, a Madolche going back to your hand? That sounds like it would trigger Salon! That's tempting enough to want to run Promenade at 3! I mean, you probably shouldn't, but the idea is fun. And that's not all. You can banish Promenade from your grave to target one Madolche Xyz monster you control, then attach to it any Madolche monster from your hand, deck, or graveyard. In effect, that's very helpful when your biggest extender requires a very specific material. The only drawback is that you can only use one effect per turn, and only once per turn, but for what it provides, it can't be beat. A searchable way to interact with your opponent on their turn that puts T-Break and Knights to shame, and a way to consistently access Choco a la mode's best effect. With Promenade at your disposal, your opponent's matches are never going to be a walk in the park. So now that we've got all our various tricks and treats sorted out, our game plan should be as follows. Blind second so that we can combo into an OTK with powerful removal options. But what can we add to complement this dish? The core of the deck is surprisingly small, so we can pack in a lot of support. Going second staples like Lightning Storm and Dark Ruler No More fit the bill quite nicely. But one of the funniest things you can use as spot removal is Kaijus. With Interrupted Kaiju Slumber at 3, you can run a robust Kaiju package, and whenever you use Tiramisu, you can scoop them right back up into your deck to use for later. I have been seeing a lot of people running Pot of Extravagance, and that kind of makes sense. The deck has no good draw options outside of perhaps Desires, and as a combo deck you need as many cards as possible to get to your endgame. You can pack your deck with 3 copies of each of the Madolche matrons, and most of the time you'll be fine. Personally, I'm very scared of losing access to any particular Madolche, but if you want to win, sometimes you have to gamble to get the big payout. A card that I'm super mad doesn't have more synergies with the deck is True King Lithosagem. If dinosaurs get to use it, then so should we! Unfortunately, while we have the necessary attributes to pull off the extra deck Shred, the reason it's good in dinos is that it thrives off of destructive effects, and Madolches just don't vibe like that. You don't even get to shuffle away destroyed Madolches to do cool stuff like put them right back into your hand with Chateau, because they need to be destroyed by an opponent. However, an idea that I'm less skeptical about is True Dracos. While tributing away your tickets and salons is not a very savory idea, once they've triggered their effects, you can potentially trade them away for large bodies that can search out powerful interruption like True King's Return and Apocalypse. It's still very experimental, and you'd have to use up a lot of space dedicated to your going second cards, but I think there's something to this. But, wild speculation aside, that's all for today's video. Once the current reign of the 2 best decks subside, I'm positive Madolche are going to be right behind them, ready to show the mettle of the Molasses Monarchy. With a lot of search effects, great removal, and just being cute as a gumdrop, Madolche will be a popular tournament pick for some time to come. But what do you all think? Am I overselling these sugary skirmishers, or do you share my views for a united culinary kingdom? And do you have any suggestions to add to the recipe? Who knows? You might even see your choices in my next livestream. Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you all so very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.